My name is Frank Schatz, and I used to be called Franciszek in Czech and Feri for Ferenc in Hungarian. So lots of names. I was born in Parkan, on a small town on the Danube River, on the Czechoslovak side of the Danube River. My parents were well off. My father owned several businesses. So my youth was quite good and full of joy and everything until the Germans came and took me to a slave labor camp. So in 1938, the Munich Agreement between Hitler and Chamberlain dismembered Czechoslovakia, and my hometown was incorporated into Hungary. There were already anti-Jewish laws at that time in Hungary, but they didn't apply to my family because my father was a war hero from World War I, and so the Hungarians had a great respect for those military heroes. Until 1944, when Eichmann descended on Hungary and started to deporting people. And it is when I was transported in a cattle car to Transylvania. I was at that time 18 years old, so I was still in preparatory school when I was taken into this slave labor camp. At the Carpathian Mountains, a beautiful place, but not if you have been a slave laborer building a railroad track for the German army on starvation diet. I wasn't physically built to be able to survive under those conditions, but I talked myself into a job as a groom for the camp commandant. He has horses. At that time, even a commandant didn't have a car. I have horses. And because as a kid, I had my own pony, so I knew how to handle horses. And I took the commandant often to the surrounding Romanian villages. And the Romanian peasant gave me extra food and also clothing. And it is what enabled me to escape during an air raid. I had a sister who was married, and she was right away when Eichmann started rounding up the Jews, she was taken with her baby to Auschwitz, and she was immediately killed, selected by Dr. Mengele as a mother with a baby, so they went to the gas chamber right away. I had a brother who was taken also to a slave labor camp. And at that time, my father and mother still could stay in our home. Like I said, the anti-Jewish laws didn't apply to them. But in 1944, in the fall, when Eichmann gave the order that every Jew has to be deported, one of the employees of my father, he had many of them, and they were long-standing employees, offered him that he had a little vineyard and had a cellar there, and he will hide my father and my mother till the Russians arrived. They were not too far at that time. At that time, the front was very close. And my mother didn't want to go in and spend her days and nights in a wine cellar. She said, I am going back to Budapest and I will find hiding there. But during the night, the Nazis came and took her, and they took him to Ravensburg. It was a concentration camp, and she died there, died of starvation. My father went to this wine cellar, and the understanding was that his employee will bring him food every day, but by chance the Germans set up an anti-aircraft battery next to the wine cellar. So he couldn't get the food. He grew a beard and came out from the cellar and went to the Germans to beg for food, played the role of a crazy hermit. And the Germans kept him alive till they had to withdraw, and a few days later the Russians arrived. So it is how he was saved. We weren't aware of it, that even Auschwitz existed at that time. So all those things we learned only after the war, and you have to cope of it, and many people were unable, and there were many suicides, and I managed to remain sane. When I said I escaped from the slave labor camp after half a year, and during a bombing raid, again a story in itself, whenever the B-17s, they call them liberators, they were bombing the railroad lines, and specifically the last remaining railroad bridge out of Budapest, what was spanning the Danube River. But whenever the bombers came and we were working on the railroad line, the guards chased us into the cornfield, and not because they wanted to save us, but save themselves. And so we had to lay on the ground till the bombers left. And the clothing what the Romanian peasant gave me, I had the civilian clothes and spoke Hungarian, and managed to get into the inner city of Budapest. I was looking for shelter, didn't have food, and by absolute miracle, I ran into the arms of my brother-in-law, who was also in a slave labor camp, but in Serbia, in a mine he was working, but he survived, he escaped, and he was already in Budapest, joined the underground, and he took me to the house what was set up, the safe houses, by Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat who saved thousands and thousands of Jews. I was issued false IDs and joined the underground, and my job was again to help other Jews to save themselves. I was delivering false papers, and to avoid to be drafted now in the Hungarian army with my false papers, I had to lower my age, 16 years old. So every few days or weeks, I got younger and younger. We had an underground, even printing press, what was turning out. And what we did, issued papers from the territories what were already occupied by the Russians. So the Hungarian official couldn't check it if it was, but those IDs had to be made very carefully that it should look like they are genuine. So many people survived just because of those papers. In my case, I always felt that you are the safest in the lion's den. I rented a bed in the apartment of a superintendent of a large apartment house. But his son was the commander of one of those killing fascist groups who were doing nothing else, only hunting down Jews and kill. And I felt that it will be the safest place because nobody in his right mind will believe that a Jew will dare to live under one roof with his potential killer. But it is exactly what happened. And nothing happened to me there. I needed a job, and I walked in one day to the, again it was the district leader of the Hungarian fascist party. And I said, I am a good party member, but I had to escape from the Russians, and now I need a job, and also a roof over my head. And he gave me a job in a factory what was manufacturing timers for aerial bombs for the German Luftwaffe. And I became there a quality controller. It means that every piece of this timer, before they left the factory, I had to look at it, that it was, and I sabotaged as much as I could. So it was one of all those things, somehow, you couldn't plan it, it just happened.
Wow, so you were quality control of the timers of the bombers of the enemy, and you were making sure that they weren't operating right?
And I made sure that it won't work, because I sabotaged it.
I love that. That's what a brave act to do.
I never thought about it as or to being afraid. You just take your chances. After the war, it's funny because I married after the war a Czech girl who was from a Catholic family where there was never a Jew in the family. And first I had to try out that she is not an anti-Semite, because it is the last thing what I need after surviving the Holocaust, to marry a girl who was anti-Semite. But she wasn't, and our marriage lasted, still lasts, but 70 years. So,
congratulations. What's her name? Tell me about your wife.
Her name is Jaroslava, and she was very artistic, and so actually I owe her a lot of things, because after we escaped and we came to United States, and I was a journalist, but in Cleveland, but we fall in love with Lake Placid in the Adirondack Mountains and wanted to make a living there, but you couldn't make it as a Hungarian writing journalist. And so we opened a leather goods store. And because she had this background in fashion design, and we did very well. And in the meantime, I was still writing and has other functions. But we made very well. And in the end, we visited Williamsburg once and fall in love with Williamsburg, and decided to have a second home here. And we did, and got involved with the College of William and Mary. And he still kept two homes, so I was often saying, when we lived half a year here and half a year in the Adirondack, that half a year we are Yankees and half a year rednecks. I was an assistant in the underground to Dr. Rezső Kastner, who was the head of the rescue committee in Hungary. He represented the International Red Cross at that time and was dealing with Eichmann. Eichmann, he was the architect of this Holocaust to deliver from Hungary 400,000 Jews to be killed in Auschwitz. And at that time, it was almost the end of the war, he was still packing those boxcars with Jews, 12,000 every day. Auschwitz couldn't take care of it anymore, but he was still sending them. So what Kastner, as a head of this rescue committee, wanted to slow down, to bribe really the Germans to not to send any more of those Jews to Auschwitz. It was a down payment for a bigger deal to Eichmann, $1 million worth of gold and jewelry in a suitcase. Now, my role was only to be a so-called schlepper, it means in Yiddish, who was carry the suitcase. So I went with him into the headquarters of the German Nazis and helped to deliver. I had a glance of Eichmann in Nazi uniform. He looked really imposing. But later, when I saw him in the television, when he was sentenced in Israel to death, he was the only one ever to be executed in Israel. He didn't look so impressive anymore. No, it was delivered to his economic, he was a major in the SS. It supposedly was all legal for them, that it wasn't for personally to Eichmann, it was going to the SS coffers. Originally, there were 3,000 Hungarian Jews from Budapest who were supposed to be sent to Auschwitz, but instead they were sent to Switzerland. But in the end, it wasn't 3,000, only 1,800 something who finally arrived to Switzerland. So 1,800 were saved because of this bribe to the Germans.
Were you scared?
No. If you would have scared, it would have shown, and it maybe would have been your end. No, you had to have self-confidence. It went with the job. I was doing it for half a year. Every minute was a new challenge. So you got used to it. And it is the only way. You have to have a will to survive. I learned that William and Mary want to establish a Center for International Studies, but they didn't have any money to do it, just the will to do it. We are closely connected with Emery and Wendy Reeves. Now, Emery Reeves was the publisher and all the publishing rights he held to Churchill papers. Churchill was also a personal friend of them. He was the author of Anatomy of Peace. It's a very substantial book about how to save world from a nuclear holocaust. And Einstein, Albert Einstein read it, and he wrote a letter that it is the answer to how to save the world. And the book became my Bible, and we became close friends, and he became my mentor. Now, he died, and his wife, Wendy, whose portrait is here, asked me that she wanted to make a memorial to him, something that will show that what a thinker he was. And it is exactly when William and Mary decided to have this study, Center for International Studies. So we invited her here, introduced her, and she gave $3 million as an endowment for the Reef Center. I gave lectures here at the college on the Holocaust and the Second World War, and I am a columnist for the Virginia Gazette, you know, one of the oldest papers in the country. And with my accent, I am a columnist for them for the past 39 years. And when I said, my editor, isn't it funny that I should be the columnist? And he said, when you write, I cannot hear you, so it is okay.
Did you have any children?
No, we didn't. We could have, but we didn't want to because after we wanted to escape from communist China, and if we would have children, we couldn't have done it. So
The war is over, but then what happens?
now I was, like I said, I went back to Prague, started my studies, and was a foreign correspondent. I soon found out how oppressive this regime is, and had people who were arrested and tortured, and it was maybe in my way, I became again part of the underground, and I started to help people to escape from Czechoslovakia. Because of my status as a foreign correspondent, I could travel easily, and so I prepared for them escape routes, and so it was my main thing. Finally, I was warned that once I was arrested, and again, interestingly, my wife insisted to go with me. The police didn't want her. And they were interrogated me all night long, but I had good connections and I didn't find anything incriminating, and that let me go. Maybe a few months later, I was warned that they are again after me and that I need to escape. I escaped with false French passport, but we didn't speak French, and we had to take the international express what came from Vienna to Stockholm, and went through 3 different communist frontiers before we reached Sweden. And each time we could have been arrested and taken back to Czechoslovakia, but we managed to get to Sweden, escape. Finally, we landed in America. Because we didn't speak French, we decided that we will speak, my wife is not Jewish, but she learned a few Yiddish words, and so we speak only Yiddish, and nobody else spoke Yiddish. So it is how we managed to get through those frontiers.
What about the Kraft mayonnaise?
They gave us that when we get to the Czech-Polish border, we should put out on the table mayonnaise and Swiss chocolate, things what you couldn't buy in a communist country. Frontier guard see it. I believe it that we must have come from the West and just passing through a communist country. And it is exactly what we did. We put out the Kraft mayonnaise and shared it with the other travelers who were legitimate. We were the only one who weren't legitimate. Because of the oppression, what I saw, that it wasn't as bad as under the Nazis, at least as far as Jews were concerned. But it was very bad, and sooner or later I would have gotten into trouble, and people were under the communism also taken to jail for no reason, sentenced. It was just a place where I didn't want to live anymore. Stalin was still alive when we escaped, so it was really, and went through also when the Stalinist purges were. So many people whom I have known were executed, hanged, So everything was telling us, get out of here. And luckily we did and came to the promised land.
After communist rule.
Yeah, we were, but I never told my wife what I am doing, that I am involved in anything. She knew something what I was doing what is illegal, but I never told her any because I didn't want if I am arrested that or if she didn't know anything, she couldn't say anything. So I was protecting her this way.
Wasn't there the knock on the door? I read that in your book, the famous knock on the door people feared.
It happened to us. Like I said, one night they were interrogating me. It's funny, we were coming from a concert at night, and we lived in a villa, and it was a garden around it. And suddenly this midnight clock came to the door. They search I didn't have to have a search warrant, but I searched everything, and I had because I was this foreign colonel and interviewed the president, the prime minister, and everything, and I got letters from them saying that I liked it or whatever. So it impressed them, all those connections. And so I have to say they never tortured me or anything. They took me to the police headquarters, the secret police headquarters. My wife insisted on coming to me, and when they were interrogating me, they came out because she was waiting in a different room, and asked her if what I said was true, and she confirmed it. So she was helped in this way. But she wasn't the one who was accused of anything.
What were they trying to find? People who were anti-communist?
Anti-communist and involved in anti-communist activity. Now, what I did was mostly to help people escape. But to escaping, it can get you into prison for life. So it was dangerous for them, dangerous for me.
Why did you do it?
Because I felt I had to do it. I didn't argue with myself. Those people, for religious reason, for political reason, I just had to get out of the country. And because I had this ability to travel, so I prepared for them. After I went through all those things and came to America and became here columnist and meet all those people, Margaret Thatcher, whom you have the photo here, and Kissinger, and it can only happen to you in America. It is what Harry Golden, the Southern writer, wrote, that only in America can happen to you that you came from nowhere and you make it. That, like this philosopher said, if you don't learn from history, you will repeat it. So history is a lesson. When I am shocked that many young people don't know enough about American history, and I'm not talking about world history. So I am trying to infuse them with desire to learn about history and take it seriously. Secondly, that life is full of hope. You should never give up. It's a very difficult time for many people, but I am a strong believer in that the collective wisdom in American public, that this country, the Constitution is now 200, how many years, and it kept this country in balance. There were extreme times, but it always, the pendulum goes back. So I am quite optimistic that it will, again, straighten itself out. For 40 years, I didn't talk about the Holocaust. past didn't interest me. I was interested in today and the future. But after those Holocaust deniers came out from the woodwork, and suddenly I realized that after my generation is gone, nobody can say I have seen it with my own eyes, I was there. So I realized that it is my duty to bear witness. And it is when I started to write about it and give lectures. We had a lecture here. One of the students, by chance, she is studying German history. And she invited me to be a speaker for her group. And I thought that I will be maybe a few dozen students. And here is a Tucker Hall, your daughter will remember it. And they was so packed, more than 200 people were there, local people from all over. And good that the fire department didn't know about it. I would have emptied it. So it happens, you start talking and people respond. Heroes was written by Alan Zulo for Scholastic. And a chapter is about, and it is about young people who did some extraordinary things during the Holocaust. And they choose me, one chapter is about me. This one is my book, and it is a compilation of some of the stories what I wrote. And it didn't become a bestseller, but it is still selling.
You look very debonair in that picture.
I was against it, but I said the book will sell better. The Reef Center, we are standing with Margaret Thatcher in the Reef Center. She sent it to my wife and me for our contribution to the Reef Center. She used to be the chancellor of William and Mary. This one is Kissinger, also in the Reef Center. He followed Margaret Thatcher as a chancellor, and so we worked together. Emery Reeves and my wife on the French Riviera, he took us for a very fancy restaurant. A description for Madeleine Albright's new book, Prague Winter, and she said in it that nobody understands more the history of Europe like me. They celebrated in the Capitol, and I'm very proud of it. And here the daughters of the American Revolution also choose me as a natural citizen. It is a very great honor to be chosen by them.